guys, it's November the 10th and the market went straight back up. I don't know, full moon. I have no idea even how to think about it. But I will say it's kind of an intriguing time right now because, you know, I've been talking to some of my friends to see like, how are you taking it? How are you thinking about it? This market is really weird right now. The earnings from companies that have come out, when I'm looking at it systematically across the, listening for what's being said and then making sure everything is removed so you can actually see what the earnings are, I'm seeing a tale of two cities. I'm seeing way more companies than I thought do better than I expected, or still remain profitable on revenue, profitable on growth. Do I think the street estimates are messed up? Yeah, I do. I don't know who's doing these street estimates, and half of them may not be allowed to actually update their estimate because of quiet periods or whatever. But like, if we were just looking at what it looks like and what it is, a lot, 60%-ish of American businesses in large cap are very healthy. A few have a couple of issues to work through, but are probably going to be okay. And then very few are really choking on it, for lack of a better way to describe it. I'm going to go through today, no companies, just CPI, because there's so much to digest in those numbers. And as much as I will at time to times get frustrated with the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that puts out the CPI number, in fairness, there really is a lot of data. So I apologize, guys. Sometimes I just get that way. Anyways, let me share my screen and just show you what's up. Past performance is not indicative of future returns. We always say that. Here's the screen. You can see almost everything is green. And, I do want to actually clarify, Meta. Somebody gave me an interesting argument for it. So I may actually revisit my thought process on Meta, but I do still think you need another quarter, even with this most recent announcement, to understand whether that $2 billion-ish in savings, let's call it, it may be more, it may be less, in headcount, given the size of his market cap, is actually going to do it, given the turnaround. So I don't know. I think that there's still a lot of volatility there. It should still be very fun for the day traders. But everything else, super green. People don't want to give my Elon some love. I think that's messed up, but we'll just go with it for now. And then if we look at the indices, Console, I do actually think is a crazy buy, but I already have several videos on that. I don't know what people are thinking is going to happen to Europe and how they're going to solve that problem. Probably, I think China is going to start selling coal. You know what? I think you may be overestimating it a little bit, but whatever. Okay, here's the indices up 5%. This is a crazy reversal from recent times, and even crude oil is up, not nearly as much is what it is. All right, now let's actually talk about CPI. And this really has to be incorporated into anyone's thought process, because it really does tell you what's actually happening now as we go into the fourth quarter. And so many companies have already reported at this point. It's really going to come down to absorbing what the heck just happened, for lack of a better way to say it, and then guessing. There's nothing else that anyone can pretend like they have, but guessing what the fourth quarter looks like. Now, I will tell you very clearly, let me stop share for a second. I will tell you very clearly that in all of the guessing that's happening, the one thing that has been crystal clear, the only area where they don't even need to guess because it's just too obvious from the companies that reported, that would be oil and gas and the entire spectrum of it, everything from equipment, although there is one weird company there, all the way to the pipelines, et cetera. There's no need to guess, okay? The demand is so intense and so aggressive, it's not necessary. Fertilizer, which we've talked about, they don't need to guess. And you can see the videos that I have on Mosaic and CF. There is a problem on the food front, and I'll show that to you. And then the other areas where people don't need to guess, security software, we'll go through them as soon as earnings season stops. But it is kind of crazy. In the rest of the economy, big cap tech, everything else going on, there is a lot of guessing. But let me show you what I'm seeing. I'm going to come back to in the CPI number that I think everybody has to take in, and I'll try to shout out and give a call out to the areas that that really probably aren't being digested. Okay, the top line number was 7.7. There's this awesome person on Reddit. I'm sorry, I forgot to pull up your name, but essentially the Cleveland group, which basically the Cleveland Fed usually is really tight on its estimates. So everybody was thinking they'll be right because there's this desire to believe that the Fed is completely out of it as relates to inflation. I don't think that's fair. You know, I'm a fan of Jay Powell, so it always pisses me off a little bit. But 7.7 is the low estimate. It's actually almost below the low estimate for the unadjusted 12-month. The 0.4 number was good. That came in line. I think people, the whisper, if there's even a whisper on these numbers, I don't think that's correct way to think about it, was 0.4. And then as you go through, you'll see energy was up. I was actually shocked that it was up 1.8% because, you know, around this time, energy prices started to increase off their lows, almost like J curve style. So it was kind of its own deal. I was actually surprised that it was as high as it was on energy, but I really want to highlight this right here. This is piped gas down 4.6. So that's your gas bill inside your house. That is unexpected. And then electricity up 0.1 and up 14.1. A lot of people are like, my electric bill is so high, what have you. But this actually, in comparison to Europe, and I also wanted to show you the global picture here, is why I have said since the very beginning that I was like, I don't know, guys, there is a way that the US does okay and Europe takes it on the chin in the worst possible way. And it has to do with how resource rich we are in the United States versus what's going on for them overseas. And I just want to reiterate this because I don't think it comes out, and it really bothers me because it really means that when people are doing their numbers or how they're thinking about it, the US will go up and then Europe will rally. It will drive me insane for sure. And I may live to have to eat crow on this, but it really should be the case that there's dispersion between the two countries or the continents, North America and, well, actually, I think there should be dispersion and Europe specifically should eat it. Everyone else should actually do fine because Europe doesn't have the raw materials. And quite frankly, I'm just going to say it. I know it's controversial, but most of Europe, ex-France, has done a big fat stupid as relates to their raw materials. Wait, I should be more specific. Scandinavia has actually done a really good job, as has the country of the Netherlands. And in fairness, the UK cutting itself off the continent might actually be okay, oddly enough. But continental Europe, disaster. And I'll show you this number. This is from euronews.com. Gas bills there are up 111% to our 14%. Okay, now businesses always pay a little less, but it's not going to, this number is so astronomical that even though this 14% is primarily being eaten by us, the consumer, because corporations spend ever so slightly less, but you can't get mad because if they didn't and the way they buy it, the utility companies would have no way to actually do any kind of longer term management of raw materials. So you can't get mad at the big companies for that. Let me just stop you right there. But this is so ridiculous. And 100% increase presumes, like, that's off of, this article is not that old. So that's still these 2 months where things are kind of chilled. We're going to go into winter. Winter is coming. And then either they have it under control or they do not have it under control. And obviously they're buying our stuff because no one else is, you know what I mean? But so that's annoying. I want to show you this. China inflation is low AF. I'm just going to say it like it is. This chart comes from Y charts, but I've been saying this the entire time. They don't have an inflation issue in Asia, right? In China specifically. So once it comes on board, it will do what it did in the past before the Ukraine war and the weird bipolar situation that has resulted even in countries that really, you know, it is what it is. But anyways, nonetheless, this is what their inflation's been. Now, have they starved their economy? Yeah. Do I think that they will not want to continue to do that for the rest of eternity? Yeah, I do actually. But do I also think they could help out Europe? Kind of. But at the same time, you know, this whole thing really highlights how smart it is to like have a little extra for your own people. America not running down reserves. As much as I love this country, I'm not really thrilled that we keep running it down. So there is that. All right. Other components. So I really wanted to show you that. Let me show you the rest of the things that I took out. I'm so tired of people being so nasty to me because I'm not a Tesla cheerleader, all right? I'm not. I have definitely talked my fair amount of smack towards Elon as well, but he does not deserve what's going on. You guys know my episode. He is selling it. We all know why he's selling it. That is not like any CEO that's selling a company. So let's just call it what it is. And all of you guys want to pretend like, oh yeah, she's got no clue. The future can't be like the present. You know what? All right. Argue with me with numbers and facts. Don't take personal shots. It's so stupid. Here's the number from new vehicle sales for the year, up 8.4%. Okay, that's pricing inflation, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it tells you that people are still buying new cars, period. All right. And the car prices in the US aren't going down. Now, is something funky happening in China with pricing? Yeah, it is. But like, guess what? That's an export business for him. All right. Used cars and trucks, that's a different story. And if you break this number apart, you'll see the components of it. I'll go through that a different day, along with the companies that are really affected by that. Carvana, CarMax, all the little parts companies. All right. So, but as far as new car sales go, they're great. And quite frankly, if you look at my episode on the railways, you'll see that they've been shipping out cars because the semiconductor shortage has resolved, and some of the raw material pricing has allowed them to actually finish these stupid cars and get them to people on Christmas time. And by the way, a lot of what's been shipped is pre-sale, because every single auto manufacturer in the US has moved to that, because guess what? Elon was effing smart. It was a better way to fund yourself. So suck it. That is what it is. All right. Next little piece that I want to talk about, food. This was actually really important in the CPI, and I'm going to walk through it. And in fairness, this is part of why I sometimes am nasty to the CPI folks. But in fairness, this is a lot of data, so I can't be that mean. So when you look at these numbers, it looks like a wall of numbers. So I've tried to highlight this number right here. The first one is year over year. The second one is year over month. So that's what this is. And then the last column, this is why the way that they do it, like this column should be here technically, and then backwards, whatever. But like this column is seasonally adjusted. Okay. And so seasonally adjusted is kind of hella important. If we look at what's going on in grains, okay, you can see very clearly that it's not because the manufacturers of cereal are just passing it through. Flour and prepared flour mixes, this is essentially the raw ingredient. This is the thing that you use to pay for because you have to bake it yourself. Okay, let's call it that way, right? This is Archer Daniel Midland. This is Kellogg. This is all those things. And realize that Kellogg and Mondelez, who I spoke very briefly on yesterday, but I will do something more, all of them have been trying not to be totally sticking it to the consumer because they kind of know better to do that. But flour prices themselves, period, on the raw ingredient, it's been going up. This is still CPI. So this is what we are paying for flour, but this flour, buying like gold medal flour, is not the way that Pillsbury and all those companies are trying to make money. General Mills is trying to make money. So realize that this 24% increase is another metric that maps to what we've been talking about grain prices, grain storage, et cetera. Also realize America is one of the biggest grain producers in the world. Okay. So don't play with me Ukraine did ship it out, la, la, la. Don't play. Okay. We are one of the biggest grain producers of the world. We just went through harvest season. Everything is known. So it's up to Latin America to produce it. Okay, that is what is going on there. Now, the other thing I want to talk about, and I want to give some love to Ag Daily. I'll put them in the show notes because I watch them. They're really good. They sit in Kansas City and the surrounding area, and they are on top of their farming game. This meat price, which is very muted relative to the grain price, right? And then we have meat, poultry, fish in general, with beef barely up on the year, up 2%. What's that all about? This is what the talking heads of agriculture that really do know their stuff are talking about, which is instead of milking the cow, they're bringing it to slaughter, or instead of doing anything else with the cattle, they're bringing more cattle to slaughter because the feed prices are going up. And so that's a real thing. We can see it in CPI. Even if you don't care about financial news, maybe that extra freezer space, you go ahead and buy it now, because quite frankly, this is usually seasonally the cheaper pricing for meat as we go into Thanksgiving anyways. So buy an extra turkey if you can, essentially, because really tells you that the farming news community is not lying to you. Not that they ever would, because the farmers are a certain type of salt of the earth people. So that's what's going on in food. Last thing I'm going to say, and this last thing in CPI is a shout out to my friends that love day trading AMC. Am I sure? How do I think about it? I do have an episode that talks about the APE shares versus the AMC shares. And if you just want to play along, given how much AMC has been brutalized on a dollar value basis, is it cheap? Is it expensive on a valuation basis? Different story. But I do talk about it in that episode, so check it out. But for my AMC guys, this data point does help you out. So I'm going to go ahead and shout out there. And that is people are spending on fun. Okay. And we can see it here in the CPI number. You can see it. Let's see. Did I hit the wrong one? I hit the wrong one. Sorry, this one. Oh my gosh. Give me a second. I'm going to find it. But if you look at movie ticket prices, it did show very positively on, oh, here we go. Admissions to movies, theaters, and concerts up 6.5% year over year. Okay. So like people are definitely spending on movies, theaters, and concerts. And if we were confused, Livewire also reporting the same thing on its earnings. I will do an episode on Livewire because even though I knew it was going to be good, I was very impressed with what happened and all of the innovation that's going on. Sporting events is what's actually driving this admissions number down. It's not. So basically movies, theaters, concerts, that huge slug is making up for the fact that people aren't going to sporting events, which is kind of crazy phenomenal if you ask me. Anyways, great number. And actually 0.9 tells you from October to September. So the month number being almost 1. If you just do the math, it's increasing, not decreasing. So I want to give a little love to my AMC friends. There you go. All right. The last couple of things here. Yes. Okay. This breakout, I usually don't look at it because I don't, by the time I've eyeballed every single thing in CPI, it's not as necessary, but I loved, in fairness, the way this is broken out because it's all items less food, all items less shelter, right? So and it gives you a sense, since the CPI number came in at 7.7, then if you're taking out one component and it's getting bigger, then you can tell that there's less inflation having that from that component. And so a lot of people have been talking about shelter and rents going up, and that's true, except that's not the biggest problem within consumer. Even though it feels like one big bill you're paying, the other stuff is actually nibbling at you a lot harder, 8.2. So that one. Food, if you remove food, I've talked about this. This one is really hitting the pocketbook because actually CPI goes down a lot if you remove food and shelter together, whatever. And then energy, all items less energy is this one, 7.0. So energy is absolutely socking it to you aggressively. If you remove food, energy, and shelter, 3 big parts of your wallet spend that you cannot change, right? You're not going to move out of your house. You're going to stay or get evicted. Let's call it what it is. You're not going to stop feeding yourself. And definitely you're not going to stop feeding your kids, guys. Please don't stop feeding your kids, and you're not going to stop driving your car to work. You might be allowed to work from home, but 5.8 is what our inflation would be if you remove those extraneous items. And then regional breakout. Sorry, that wasn't the last thing, but this is the last thing. There's a lot in this thing. I just want to show you. They just do it. Hold on, let me make this a little smaller so you can see it. This is a percentage change from October to this year. And then these are the monthly changes. Okay. So you can kind of see that over the entire period, the Northeast has lagged price increases versus everyone else. And let's just call it what it is. That's New York City and Boston. Okay. That's what it is. We've had a really, really sucky time with COVID, our big dense cities, and then all the talent pool drifting on out. I get it, is what it is. Right. Okay. So we have had the least inflation in the Northeast. Who has had the most inflation? That's our West Coast friends over in Cali. Sorry, guys. And then if these are the monthly numbers, so this would be the month to look at is September, you can kind of see that we in California and the South, the 3 areas where you are getting population growth, terrible. The Midwest actually not as bad. So, you know, you Midwesters, you have that over all of the rest of us. Very cool. And with that, I will stop share. Sorry, it's a mouthful. It's a big release, but you know, hey, David.
Very, very, very good information, Maya. I like your reference to Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities,
It is.
especially for crypto. Because I
Yeah.
remember you were like, I don't know, 6 months ago, several months ago, you were in favor of shorting all crypto except Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And all the other stuff, Michael Saylor, who I respect, is he says all the other stuff is just trash. Like this FTX thing, which caused the big sell-off yesterday.
Yeah. The
So
fact, in
it
fairness,
needs
I
to be
have,
regulated, but Bitcoin is the only one that has value at this point in time.
yes,
So
Bitcoin definitely
kudos.
has value, if for no other reason than El Salvador and a few other countries are absolutely interested in it.
Right.
And quite frankly, one of the key components of why they should be interested in it is this whole fluctuation of the euro, which I think the currency guys are all over the map on how they spin it, but we know what's going to happen to Europe. And if you're holding euro and you know that they have to massively import stuff, let alone energy, just to get through the winter, and that there are significant shortages, it's really hard if you're a government organization to be like, yeah, let's hold euro in reserves. You know, you got to pay down debt at some point. Maybe you can pay it in euro, but it's going to really keep the dollar fairly strong. You know, so there's that. That's the first thing, right? I guess the other thing, so Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies, their original use case was for that reason to begin with. So there's some real use case there. I would say that I have evolved my thinking slightly to where some of the other major cryptocurrencies, and by major, I mean, they really do have enough, what I'm going to call GDP, but I think they call it projects on it to justify its value. And also, very important, the types of projects are not hokey, okay? Or the types of projects aren't just a bunch of leverage, which was what happened with Terra Luna. I will do a video on that after we get through earnings season, but that would imply that Binance, who I am a huge fan of, it would imply that Binance looked at FTX and was like, hell no. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I want to revisit some of these crypto thought process, because Binance is a legit company that legitimately has a bunch of projects on it that probably justifies that coin by a lot, not by a little. And I do think like XRP, as much as it gets sometimes like some anger, let's call it, it legit has projects that make sense. It's not a bunch of like smoke and mirrors leverage that exists on a fake bank, which is really what some of these exchanges are. Sorry, not all of them, okay, but some of them. And there's one other, I don't
Yeah,
know why.
the Binance CEO, I can't pronounce his name, is he says, don't ever look at the price, just look at the project.
Yeah. So I believe, and I will do a video on this, that there is a way to think about these cryptocurrencies in the context and framework that a finance person would think about it, not just, I love everything, right? There is a way to think about it in terms of GDP, real growth and real money that people are willing to spend. Binance looks like that. Bitcoin looks like that. XRP looks like that, and a couple of others do actually look like that. Cardano is working its way, but I think it's on the cusp, if not possibly looks like that as well. But there's a few different companies where if you really understand the nature of what they've done and how they're doing it, probably are okay with varying degrees of volatility on each one of them. Let me say it that way, because when it comes down to it, they really are an emerging currency. I do already have a video for people that are just watching, because I know this will put this on YouTube eventually. I do have 2 videos on cryptocurrency. The second one talks about probably what I think is the closest real world comp to crypto, which is the Singaporean dollar. And I do a lot of work to try to make it edible for the average person, digestible for the average person, because the Singapore dollar also looks a lot like these cryptos back in the day. Now, not so much, okay? But back in the day, they became a nation in 1968. Yeah, I believe it's 68. They at first, there was like a bunch of stuff between them and Malaysia where they were part of Malaysia, and they were like, listen, no mas, this isn't working out for us. And what Lee Kuan Yew and what makes him such a boss. I'm just going to say it. He is such a boss. He's not the most like nicest to, like, there were some things, right? But let's just call it what it is. He's a total boss. But what makes him such a boss is they literally are the smallest island between two Muslim countries. They were Christian. That's part of the story of Singapore at the time. Now they could care less, right? But they're sitting there with 60% of their population being Chinese between two Muslim countries that are fighting each other. So that's why everyone has to go to the military in Singapore. And he's like, what the F am I going to do? And he ends up turning Singapore into a massive financial hub and making the Sing dollar this amazing real currency. It actually is a reserve currency. And you look at the size of that nation, you think the fact the pound is still a real currency, given the size of that relative, no, Singapore is way more impressive if you just look at the land mass versus how many people hold Sing dollars. And that video, you should check it out as well. But yeah, sorry, long story, short story long as per usual. But that's why I think that if you use the logic of the Sing dollar and then transfer it to each and every single one of the currencies, there is absolutely a way for you to figure out which ones should exist and which ones are just a big fat donut.
And the Singapore, he based it on what?
Oh, he's brilliant. Oh my God, Lee Kuan Yew, like total props. He's such a boss. He's like, okay, what do we do? And he basically created the financial markets for Asia, like Singapore, as you well know, because you've been at this game for so long. So Singapore becomes this massive, sorry, I've been too. Sorry, that's ageist. I'm so bad. Okay, but you've been at this game a long time, and you know there was a time when Singapore, like whatever, right? It definitely isn't Singapore bling nation like it is now. But the deal that he did was he was like, all right, we need stable financial markets. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that for everybody because I know that you guys aren't going into China because China's going into isolationist, but you might want exposure to China and then Hong Kong. And so he's like just building really good financial systems. That by far, even I love Ray Dalio and his book, but we really got to, he talks about this a little bit, but I don't think he gives it the weight that it deserves. So he creates these amazingly stable markets. He takes huge amounts of money that were being given at that time, so we got the Korea War, the Vietnam War, all that stuff going on. He takes that money like a champ and becomes like this really amazing nation on the finance front, built there first, right? And then they're really good about how they take that capital and put it in the various governmental agencies, which he runs that country like a business. It's crazy. Like the GIC, if you look on their website, if you look at the government development banks of Singapore, there's a gazillion of economic ECB, I think it's an economic, anyways, go look on what that country looks like a business. Okay, let's call it what it is. And then he's like, all right, at some point, China's going to open and the Chinese are going to want to put their money somewhere else. What are we? 60% Chinese as a nation. What do we speak? Mandarin and English. The actual language of Singapore, the national language is English, but the number of people that speak Chinese there is off the charts, right? You could absolutely get away with Cantonese for sure, Mandarin 100%, English, whatever. These people are brilliant. So basically, through the 90s, because Hong Kong's going back to China, everyone with money in Hong Kong that didn't want to vacate the Asia region in general starts putting their money in Singapore. Singapore uses that capital and a number of other things to try to get people to build houses, tax dollars, tax revenue, right? And so basically that flood of capital comes in, he uses it on real projects to build GDP. And then Hong Kong goes back to China, and people are like, I don't know, I kind of like working in Singapore. It's a beach town. It's really easy to commute, la, la, la. So that's what happens in the first wave of Singapore. And I went there for the first time in 2000. There wasn't a tree. Half the buildings weren't even built. Your drive from the airport to wherever you were going to go in Singapore looked like a third world country. I'm sorry, I love you guys, but it's true. Now, if you drive from the airport to Singapore proper is this gorgeous, luscious, amazing land of high rises and perfectly kept, no trash, everything. It's like the whole country is a nice neighborhood, right? Okay. And then the last thing I would say is that you would think everybody's worried, is Singapore going to crash now that Hong Kong is gone back to China? The answer was no. What actually happened was Taiwan and China are now like doing this crazy. And so all the Chinese are like, it would be nice now that I'm a gazillionaire China baller to have a little bit of money out of the country just in case. Singapore straight up benefits from the rise of China. It's unbelievable. Lee Kuan Yew, you rock. You guys know this is the story. So that's the quick story of what's up. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Singapore.
Yeah, it's a cool story, right? I think.
How is Hong Kong? They've got a special way China treats Hong Kong.
Yeah, it is.
Elon Musk, it's called some kind of zone or something. I mean, maybe they could do Taiwan the same way.
Man, that's danger
In other
talk.
words, one country and two different systems.
Yeah, the one country, two policies thing. Yeah, that was the original mantra. The only difference is the Taiwanese have history. Hong Kong, because of that lease with the UK, they didn't have any basis whatsoever to not go back to China, right? Macau, Hong Kong both went back 97, 99. But Macau has really all been about gambling, and the Macanese are just not the same as the Hong Kong people in the way they feel about things. Sorry, in fairness, my dad was from Guangxi, so like there is a certain love I have for Macau. but Hong Kong has always been a little bit of a different thing because of the British influence versus the Portuguese influence. But it's hard to like compare it to Taiwan. So Taiwan, Chiang Kai-shek went to Taiwan. He went at the end of World War II, and that was what it was. Okay. And it was dramatic. It was whatever. And in fairness, he actually brutalized the people of Taiwan so that he could get power. So it's kind of a weird thing and place that we've come to. But Taiwan has, over the last whatever period of time, developed its own culture and its own way of doing things. Does it look a lot like Chinese culture? Is it highly compatible? In some ways, yes. And other ways, I kind of, like, I'm so afraid to say too much because I love so many of my Taiwanese friends and I do appreciate where they're coming from. I don't know if the people are going to feel that way. That said,
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. There's history there.
There's history, unfortunately. They're like two cousins that are not cool with each other. But like, I have shown the slides before in the past. You can look at past episodes. I'll try to tag it at the end of this YouTube. But like, where you see very clearly that if you took out China and Hong Kong from GDP, it would cripple Taiwan. So it's really about figuring out how the cosmetics work for everybody more than anything else. One thing I will say is the US doesn't really have a great claim on Taiwan or a great claim for really helping Taiwan other than to create shit, for lack of a better way to say it. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's always been a concern. If you Google search, Australia is always worried about it because there's always, there's such a ridiculous sphere of influence in Asia, in the greater Asia region. Japan is a little bit like resigned to it, for lack of a better way to say it. And so is Korea. They've just resigned to the fact that they just can't do much about this ridiculous 1,000-pound gorilla that sits in the Asia region. So it'll be very interesting to see how Asia transforms. There's definitely better people on this than me, but I try to keep up with it occasionally to the extent it affects my markets.
Okay, one final thing. I mean, Tesla, you just read the numbers and no personal bias. All you're saying is, hey, look at these numbers and there's value here. Long term, build a position. I mean, that's the way you really build wealth through stocks.
Yeah, it's going to be bumpy here for a little bit because if you think about it, there are a couple of things that still are unresolved. But in general, is Tesla cheap right here? Yeah, because the growth rate that's, if you look at the numbers, period, some people are like, well, do you really think he can continue to grow revenue at 55%? I'm like, he doesn't have that big of a market share. So at what, like, could he do it next year into one of the biggest EV promotions of all the nations on the earth? I don't think it's so ridiculous to think he could do it. Plus you have inflation, tapering on raw materials, but increasing on labor, i.e. income, and et cetera. Like, next year doesn't seem crazy to me. Some people do a multi-year peg. So they're like trying to do a 10-year peg, which I think is quite frankly insane, but I'll give it to you. You know what I mean? That, I don't know. because who the hell knows what happens a decade from now. I would say that the battery business really impressed me this last quarter. And given what we're seeing in the macro trends, the fact that he has a profitable battery business on lithium ion is nothing short of impressive, especially since lithium prices are going to the moon. And yet somehow that man has figured out how to be the only one with raw materials during a raw material crisis. I don't know. That's where I stand. I know I've got haters on that, is what it is. Like,
Well, I mean, a lot of the haters are, I mean, bearish. They're saying, the Twitter thing takes away from his focus on Tesla. I mean, I don't think he runs Tesla day to day. I mean,
totally agreed. His only role is to make sure that his marketing expense is zero by doing crazy stuff that continues to bring interest to Tesla, to be honest, in my opinion. At this point, and that is a testament to the fact that he knows how to hire good people. Let's call it what it is. I saw something today where people were like, oh, it's because he's moving all these executives from Tesla over to Twitter. But I'm like, it's usually not just one layer of executives that's really good. Usually the guy underneath is like, finally, I can run this damn department. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, as long as he's got good headcount all the way through, it doesn't matter if he moves like one or, a handful of executives over to Twitter to actually fix it. And also the reason why I think that might be true is that it does seem like the people that work for Tesla are zealots. They're not just, oh, I'm going to work for an auto manufacturer. Do you know what I mean? They're like passionate about the mission. So I give them that as credit.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Yeah, I don't think, look, as much as I want to criticize different CEOs at different times, and there's plenty to criticize Elon on. There's lots of things that you could say about his leadership style and different things that he would deserve to get lots of criticism on. But the stuff I've been seeing recently, it's really lowball, in my opinion. It's obviously a bunch of journalists that are pissed they got fired, you know what I'm saying? Or are pissed because they personally hate Elon for some reason, that Twitter is now owned by him, whatever it is. But have a look at my episode on Elon, the last episode, 2 days ago. Like anyone, the shareholders of Twitter should be pissed at the prior management of Twitter, not at Elon, especially after the April quarter. I'm just gonna say. So I don't know. That's where I felt.
There's no longer shareholders of Twitter, but
right. No, I mean the shareholders that suffered through that period of that shit for management. Sorry, that terrible management approach. They should I own Twitter in the 25 level because I bought it as the transition was happening. I looked at the numbers and I was like, oh, you know what? Let me just take a flyer on this. It's such a low dollar value company. So I own the shares at that point that the transaction went through. And then all of that, like from April till now that the management team put us through, that was unnecessary. So you're trying to stick it to Elon. That's fine. He's like at that point, 15% of the shares at the 9 or something like that. I don't know if he continued to buy afterwards, but like, what about the other 85% of the shareholders plus? We don't deserve it. Do you know what I mean? Goodbye. That's all I have to say. Goodbye and good riddance.
Okay, that's all we have. Thank you, May. Very, very important.
Take care. Good luck, you guys.